Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Vijay Kumar, the Associate Dean for Open Learning and Executive Director of the J-WEL World Education Lab, and dare I say, a co-conspirator in Georgia's wonderful effort in launching GOI, the Global Opportunities Initiative. This is the last panel of, for those of you who have been following this session since the morning will agree, has been a very, very exciting set of discussions. So this is the last panel of the day, and very appropriately, it's been called the Wicked Challenges panel. I won't elaborate on the term wicked over here. Wicked is not evil, bad. Wicked is a sense of degree, as in it's wicked hot in India, or it was wicked disappointing yesterday to see the Celtics lose, but that's wicked in the sense of extremity. And this is about the hard challenges that confront the space. But before I get launched with this very illustrious panel, I do want to say a word about GOI, the Global Opportunities Initiative, which, its purpose, and we were talking about it yesterday as we were talking about this panel. The intent really over here is to create a global, shall I say, a career culture globally. So it's to really construct a fabric, which is composed of all these initiatives, draws upon all these initiatives, which really pays attention to this very, very important area in multiple ways. So it's create the scaffolding fabric, which we call the career culture, a global career culture. And so it is a movement in that sense. And I used the example yesterday, which I'll say, when MIT launched OpenCourseWare many years ago and said it would put out the content of all its courses on the web for free for the world. That is very good, very important, thrives to this day with upwards of 2,000 courses and millions of users. But the important thing that happened at that time was other institutions came in. In fact, a global education consortium was formed. And the activity became a movement and brought the culture of open into the educational space in very profound ways. And that is the aspiration over here, so that we pay attention to this very, very important and area in flux. The case for GOI, and to set the stage for this panel, is pretty clear for all of us over here. I like to characterize it as a career vector. There's a sheer enormity of the demand side. People, workers who are locationally displaced, vocationally displaced because in the jobs they need to get out, locationally displaced because of any kinds of social, political crisis, labor markets moving, people who have perennially remained being underserved in terms of having access to learning opportunities that would advance their careers. We talk about women who've been traditionally underserved, veterans who might have been underserved. So there's all those folks. So there are all these folks who are traditionally underserved, and there's this whole new growing, exploding cadre of new learners. That's the magnitude part of the vector. The direction part of the career vector that, again, we all know very well is the fact that, there are new skills that are needed. And we talk about, the reaction to the digital transformation, the centrality of digital in the workspace. A friend characterized it very nicely. He says, look, when we studied geography, it was atlases and maps, which became 1 million images on Google Earth, which has now become an intelligent service on my watch. So every hard product is being transformed into an intelligent soft service. What are the implications in terms of what skills, competencies? But it's not just in a reactive sense, it's in a proactive sense. The workforce, companies, industries recognizing the productive advantages to be gained by employing technology. And of course, there are other kinds of social practices, social influences that's coming about in the content space also. So there you have it. That's a range of the problem space, which presents the context for wicked challenges. And I have a very illustrious panel. We are very fortunate to have this illustrious panel, which brings different dimensions, different perspectives from their experience. I'm just going to almost, their backgrounds are there. They'll be talking more about their work as we go through the panel. We have, I'll just mention the names and quick backgrounds. We have Katie Hall from Claira, who spent 8 years in global workforce development building, developing competency models, helping companies, policy organizations prepare for the future of work. We are quite familiar with her work here at MIT. She has helped work with George in framing the human skills matrix over here. And I will prompt her later on to certainly talk about some of the interesting work that she has done in terms of a term that she used for promoting awareness of the business value of competencies, as well as this thing about connected credentials. So I'm hoping that she will talk about that. There's Charlie Boyle, our friend from Ireland. Charlie, as he likes to say, that the customer experience is a battleground of the coming decade, and service excellence is fast taking center stage. He works with clients directly as well as through IMI and Enterprise Ireland, with the public and private agencies. He is a keen advocate of customer experience. There were some very interesting conversations around soft skills and values that we brought into the conversation. I hope he'll bring those perspectives into his comments. Then we have Mariana Costa, Checa. She's the CEO and co-founder of Laboratoria, which is a social enterprise that gives young women from low-income backgrounds in Latin America advances their careers in technology. Very interesting dimension. Before becoming a social entrepreneur, she worked for organizations such as TechnoServe and OAS, the Organization for American States, an organization that I work closely with, and helping advance various social movements. Mariana will, I hope you'll bring that particular dimension of addressing these perennially unmet audiences, women in particular, into your comments. And last but not least, we have Phil Bush from Rockwell Automation. Phil is the business development manager for the Academy of Advanced Manufacturing. In this role, he helps lead Rockwell's automation efforts to upskill military veterans into frontline automation support roles. His work touches on a lot of the work that we have been doing very closely with DoD, for instance, on advanced manufacturing, and it'll be very interesting to hear those particular perspectives in the conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the panel. We will start with Katie. And Katie, as you make your comments, we would be very, very interested in hearing about some of the work around connected credentials, some of the work that you've been doing.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Great to be here. Thanks for joining, and thanks for having me on the panel. I love the panels where I get to learn more than I talk. So these are great fun for me. As Vijay mentioned, I spent a bit of time at MIT recently working on the human skills matrix, and so always like to participate in events affiliated with building the future that we all desire to see, and not just sort of letting it happen to us. So love this event and celebrating the launch of the initiative. I'll just do a quick intro and touch on some of the things mentioned up front. So I'm located in Michigan. Actually, I have lived in Michigan most of my life. I'm a born and raised Midwesterner. My family's here, stints in Boston, DC, and Europe, but spent most of my life in the Midwest. I got into workforce and economic development about 10 years ago. I watched the economic decline of Detroit that all of you have been hearing about, where the city lost almost 2/3 of its population. A lot of my friends were working on automotive and various other industries in Detroit and ended up moving to Chicago, moving to Ohio, and never came back. So I became really interested in the inefficiencies in the system of economic development, but more precisely in connecting people to work, and became obsessed with the fact that resumes and job descriptions were two different languages that didn't really talk to each other, that half the world's population doesn't even have a resume if they don't have a degree, that bias gets introduced into the process in order to make those two things match together and actually take an educational background or a military background or a caretaking background and try to fit that into a job, especially when people are going to have 27 jobs now during their lifetime. So I became obsessed with this inefficiency that I saw in the system. And, I have, it took me 40 years, but I managed to get myself 2 master's degrees. And I've had trouble selling myself in an interview and connecting to work and been personally frustrated. And so I can only imagine what the experience is more broadly. I started working for a nonprofit called Corporation for a Skilled Workforce. I'm a big fan of Van Ton Quinlovan, who you'll hear from after this. I've been following her work for a long time. And connecting credentials was an initiative that I focused on during my time in workforce nonprofit. This was a Lumina-funded grant project that was meant to use competencies to help unpack various credentials. So what does a degree mean you can do? What does a master's degree mean? What does an associate's degree mean? What do we do with all the certifications that aren't degrees? How do we connect all those things together and give a clearer picture? And that work led me to start the company that I run now, Claira, which is a competency analytics platform. So we are a data set of competencies that companies can use to understand their workforce, hire, and identify gaps, identify better performing teams. The premise being, in order to keep pace with the future of work and build equity, we have to get to a smaller unit that applies to everyone in the labor market. And we think that those are competencies. So that's what we've built. Looking forward to hearing from the others and answering some questions later on.
Thank you very much, Katie. Perhaps we can now move on to Charlie.
Thanks, Vijay. Charlie Boyle is my name. Customer Service Excellence Ireland is a program that I started about 7 years ago on my return from the UK, where I had worked for about 13 years in the hospitality sector, pubs, bars, restaurants, etc. And I didn't have a primary degree. I went straight into the world of work after school, as a lot of people did that time. And I suppose the light bulb moment was I kept on one of these sales awards in the UK for sales of drink, as you should do for the industry that I was working in. And I remember winning one particular sales award, which took me out to the States, and the guy that was going to do the interview with me asked me what my sales strategy was. And this is a question he was going to ask on the stage the following night. It was actually a Budweiser promotion. And I said, please don't ask me that question because I don't understand the word strategy and I don't have a sales strategy. And he said, you absolutely do. You just don't know what it is, but we'll tease that out. And what we found out in the conversation is that the sales strategy in terms of customer service I had was that we were very good at internal customer service. So we had a team of maybe 50 staff at the time. It was over 2 pubs that were going really, really well, 2 bars that were going well. And I didn't know the terminology of it, but what I identified was good internal customer service or culture. And as a result of that, we looked after the team looked after the customer. Sales was an inevitable outcome of that. I was then to go back and study that, and I'd done a master's on leadership and innovation. And I looked at that connection between internal customer service and sales and the connection there. And through that, I become hungry for education, for more learning, I became very, very curious of how companies worked and worked well. I believed in this, this concept that sales is an outcome. It's, this thing of always be closing, which is 30 years ago. I believe that we should build a person. We should build a better human. And as a result, they will become a better salesperson. You could see the same about any sector or any same like situation. So when I created Customer Service Excellence Ireland, I didn't want it just to be frontline training. I wanted it to be something that measured the internal of the company. So very often we might get a telephone call, can you come in and look after our frontline staff and train them up? And this might come from a CEO or the head of HR. And perhaps too quickly, what I was saying, well, how do you know it's the frontline staff? How do you know it's not your culture? And I found out that wasn't a really good question to ask them right away, because they mightn't have been prepared to have that particular light shone upon them. So we started off doing a lot of customer service training, which we still do. But more and more what we're doing now is the internal part, you know, the looking at the culture, the internal customer service. And then I got involved in the last number of years in apprenticeships in Ireland. And I know there's been a lot of talk today about apprenticeships, and what we call the apprenticeships in recent years, in the last 5 years in Ireland, is these new generation apprenticeships. And it's interesting, somebody else mentioned mastery earlier on in the day in the conversation. In particular with its sales, we created a sales apprenticeship in Ireland, which we believe to be a global first. So an apprenticeship in professional sales, because every company needs salespeople. But when we spoke to the likes of Google, and remember, Ireland is a particular hub for a lot of the American multinationals based here in Dublin and trading into Europe and the Middle East. So we went to them, they opened the doors to us, and we said, right, we're thinking of starting a sales apprenticeship. What are your thoughts? And they were very, very positive about it. And the point that they were making is, we no longer want somebody with a 3 or 4 year university degree, because what we need to do is we need to unlearn and reteach them. So we would rather get somebody at 18, 19 years of age that was quite keen, that had the right attitude, that had, you know, all of the other competencies, and to take them through an apprenticeship. So the apprenticeship we looked at was a Swiss model. And when we talk about mastery, as we have done earlier on, if you think of the Swiss watchmaker who was a master tradesman, the Swiss model of apprenticeship was somebody who worked alongside that master craftsman, that master watchmaker. And the model that's here, and I know Dr. Owen Doherty, who's work-based learning expert here in Ireland, they started creating these apprenticeships where the workplace mentor was central to the whole program. So training somebody up in the workplace, catching that person who was a master in the workplace and giving the mentor the skills, because that's sustainable over time. It means that that mentor will always be there as a sort of teacher, as a lecturer in the work-based situation, be that a shop, a store, a pub, you know, a construction company, wherever that might be. So the work-based learning apprenticeships in Ireland have been really, really successful, because here was a country, and Ireland actually has one of the highest educational participation rates in the world. I think Bill spoke earlier on about 38% of Americans have degrees. In the UK, it's 40%, and in Ireland, it's 53%. So, you know, as long as we can keep ahead of the UK, we're always quite happy. I'm sure you know the history there. But, you know, jokes aside, we have a high participation rate, but here was the problem. We were sending 89% of our second level students into third level, only to watch 25% of them drop out. So the students were not the problem, the system was the problem. Yet we were using terms like dropout and failure. And this was causing, we believe, serious mental health issues. And it's something that we have to be very, very honest about, because the peer pressure was so high to go into third level and to complete third level that we didn't have other really, really credible pathways. So the apprenticeship pathways were set up for that very reason. What I've become very interested in the MIT research of recent years, and it's great to have the likes of Katie, who was, you know, responsible for that here, George, obviously, who we've been out and we've spoken to and we've walked through MIT, is this area of human skills. Because constantly what we find out with our interaction with the employers in Ireland is they are saying roughly the following. In terms of product knowledge, they want perhaps the student or the employee to have 35% product knowledge of whatever it is they're doing. In terms of digital skills, they want them to have possibly 15, 20% digital skills. But in terms of human skills, they would require and want the employee coming in to have 50% human skills. The anomaly quite clearly, and the wicked problem for us, Vijay, is those human skills are not being taught. When is the last time that we heard empathy taught in a secondary school: collaboration, negotiation, critical thinking, ethics, strategic vision, all of these hugely important human skills. So we're very, very good in Ireland at the digital skills, the digital focus. And remember, it's not a war. It's not a war between digital and human. It's a walk. We must walk together with both of those, because one complements the other in so many ways. So in terms of the wicked problem, it's about, finding out, and I think we spoke about it yesterday, what's the wicked solution to that problem? And the wicked solution from our point of view is the creation of a Human Skills Institute here in Ireland, which we will now create in the months and the year ahead to make sure that both Ireland and the UK, because we're now friends, we're neighbours, we work really, really well together, and that's exactly what our ambition is. And delighted to be here and be part of the panel today, and thank you for the introduction.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Charlie. We will come back to this. I'm glad you touched on the wicked challenge and the solution. I will just place a comment for future discussion, which is part of what I was worrying about as I was listening to you present this whole person approach to apprenticeship, was how do you scale such efforts? And Katie, I want to mark this before I forget it, is the part of what you were describing, the question that you're talking about, credentials, etc., pointed to me was in a world where, which is a gig world, we have gigs economies, gig skilled people, mobile learners all over. How do you present credentials in such a vastly distributed ecosystem? Is a challenge we can think about and come back to. I just wanted to pop that into your head so that you can be ruminating on that as we move on to our next wicked challenge person, Mariana. We really want to hear about the wonderful work that you've been doing through Laboratoria, as well as some of the very focused efforts that you were describing in this realm.
Yes, thank you. Super interesting discussion, and I'll comment a little bit on what Charlie just mentioned. So at Laboratoria, what we do is we start by trying to identify women with potential to learn and to launch careers in tech that haven't been able to start a professional career yet, most often due to economic limitations. We take them through an immersive bootcamp experience. It's a full-time program where they learn to become web developers or UX designers, and the program has a huge focus on life skills. And then we place them in companies that are in need of their talent, and the outcome for our students is jobs that pay 3 or 4x than what they were making before. Not only a job, but really the start of a career where they will have incredible opportunities to grow as time goes by. And we are also bringing much needed talent and diverse talent, in particular women, to the tech scene in Latin America. We have over 2,500 graduates already, and really good placement rates that make us feel really proud, and lots of learnings throughout the years. So going back to talk about human skills, when we started, one of the things that we said from the beginning was we need to have a strong focus on human skills, because these are one of the core competencies to be able to transition and grow in a professional career. Because many of these skills are going to be what makes it or breaks it, no? And determines whether our students are actually able to land a job. We won't be giving, this is not a degree, it's not a 5-year university degree. Our students really need to show and practice that they can be up to the standard of what the companies will demand from them, as it happens with any professional. And also because we're serving women in particular, and as women in the context that we have for women in Latin America, there is a lot of space and opportunity to really invest in women's empowerment and women in the workforce. So we said, okay, this is what we want. How do we do it? And for the first 2 years, I would say, we went about it in parallel. So we had the technical, and then we had the life skills. So we had the technical classes and then the workshops for life skills. And at one point, we realized that it wasn't really going to work out if we didn't merge the two things together and design a way of learning the technical that build the human. So that's what we did. We radically changed our whole methodology to a project-based learning approach that there's a lot of, it all revolves around the capacity of our students to be the owners and guide their own learning journey. And the way in which they learn the technical is actually the best possible way to build key human skills that we value. So self-knowledge, for example, that's one of the core things that we want to ensure that our students have. Self-awareness, the way that they learn the technical, this is just at the core of everything, because they're going to decide based on what they like, what they don't like, what they're good at, what they're not, what they need, and how they approach their learning journey. Collaboration, there's so much teamwork embedded in how they learn, peer-to-peer feedback, community support. So this is a core part of how they work. The program is self-paced, so they need to be organized. If not, they're not going to be able to make it. So really making sure that they're able to organize, to plan ahead in a professional way so that they can comply with what the program entails. Self-love in a way, and believing in yourself. I think this is maybe one of the main impacts of our program. It's a place where students don't only come to learn JavaScript, they really come to believe that they can make it, believe that they deserve to make it, and they deserve a career that they can feel proud of and in which they can grow, and that they have the community and the support to make it happen. So that sense of belief, that growth mindset is at the core of the experience. And I am certain, we sometimes say that technical is just the excuse. It's really the personal transformation that comes with the program that enables them to go out, get a job, and actually launch a career, grow, become an example for many other women. So yeah, that has been an amazing experience for us. We need to make the human skills very practical, and we need to integrate them in how we learn technical skills.
Yeah. Thank you, Mariana. That's so important what you said, something that resonates very strongly with me. When you're talking about the agency, the empowerment, we work a lot with Peter Senge, who has this, and Lana was moderating an earlier panel. So there's work around the compassionate systems framework that we do, and there's and part of the agenda there is, it's not just about these technical competencies, but to develop that kind of self-awareness, that empowerment that allows you to execute change or affect your skills. I am going to point to something that, we are talking about wicked challenges here. So these are things under, in the lower part of the iceberg, the part that we don't see normally. And this will, I'll put this out to the panel to think about, because some of it has implications for Katie's comments also. There is a couple of agencies that we work with who do some wonderful work with vision impaired people and how productive they can be in the workforce. So we do a lot of stuff. We have lots of programs, applications to teach coding to vision impaired people, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a whole bunch of people out there. The readiness is not just at the level of these individuals who become competent, to develop the skills, et cetera, but at the level of the organization in its capacity, ability, tendency to recruit these people, and so one of the reasons why I think something like GOI is so important is to create that kind of a culture within organizations. It takes two to tango. You can do a lot of competency development, but to create institutional culture and capacity, it needs some collective movement. And part of my question to you all is, how do you create the business value, to use Katie's terms, of the diversity of these kind of women in leadership? I sit on panels from Solve, which have lots of initiatives for women leadership, etc. And the worry that always nags me is, how do you create the organization's readiness to absorb this new workforce, if you will? Phil, and we'll come back to this. I hope you'll think about this, in your closing comments. Phil, you come from a world that is very familiar to us from the work that we've been doing. Give us your perspectives on the new world of competencies. Phil, you're muted. We can't hear you.
All right, is that better?
Absolutely. Yes.
I change the setting and you can never change it back. So first of all, I appreciate the participation in the panel. Just to kind of give you a little background on the Academy of Advanced Manufacturing and kind of how it's an ecosystem or framework for discussing some of those skills, challenges, and whatnot. The Academy of Advanced Manufacturing, what we do, it's a veteran-centric program, and really as Rockwell Automation, we're industrial automation manufacturer. But the focus of the program is actually to connect manufacturing customers of ours to veterans who have technical skill sets that can move in and support the manufacturing floor as the technology is evolving. One of the commentary I often have with folks is that, especially in the manufacturing sector, jobs are not going away, they're changing. So you don't have the classic old school manufacturer of repetitive, I'm going to solder a resistor on a circuit board that's done by robots. But what you now have is the person that needs to know how to work with that roadmap, troubleshoot it, resolve it. And that's a skill set that's at a premium right now in the manufacturing space. And as we look at everything going on in the world, global supply chain, all of that comes back to manufacturing capacity, throughput, and keeping the technology up and running as we go. And what we've seen in the workspace prior to the pandemic, and certainly during the pandemic, it's been further exacerbated, are folks with skill sets that can support that automation technology. They don't need to do the calculus to figure out the arm, how the arm all works, but they need to know, all right, if I flip this bit, what's going to happen to this output on this controller, or what's going to happen in the actual production environment if I tweak this code. So they need to understand the practical, and that's a skill set that's at a deficiency in the market. So we started this program to try and identify folks with technical skills that give us a framework to build further domain knowledge in a manufacturing environment on top of. And one of the many reasons we've focused on the U.S. military veteran population is one, kind of their attitude and aptitude around getting the job done, mission focus, being ready, willing, and able to do what it takes to resolve an issue, but also those technical domain skills that they acquire in their time in service, or quite frankly, post-service if they go on to do things like being an electrician, something like that. That gives a foundation where we can put very specific skill sets on top of it, and then get them hired out in the workforce to close that gap that manufacturing employers are seeing. And one of the things that we found is that this really helps, and this maybe gets to a little bit of the wicked challenge we're facing as well, is that, if you take the veteran population, they are acquiring skills in the military that are very translatable to the civilian world, right? Not everyone is, as they would say, a trigger puller or a medic or a combat this, combat that. In fact, 93% of military veterans never actually see direct combat. They're in service roles, they're support roles. So they're acquiring skill sets that are translatable to the civilian world, but there is a lot of difficulty in doing that translation. People don't in the civilian world don't necessarily understand what they see when they're looking at a resume from someone who served in the military. They don't understand, what a 16 Yankee is in the Army versus an avionics specialist on the F-22 in the Air Force. That context is lost. So what we have found is by marrying a collection of skill sets that we train on with support around this is what a veteran is, this is what they've experienced, and then get them in front of that workforce, we find that translation problem can go away, and you get folks that go from their time in the military directly into, high-paying, manufacturing, career-sustaining jobs that they simply can't get into without kind of that intervening element. And so that's really the challenge, is how do we identify skill sets and make them applicable across a broad spectrum of jobs? And then additionally, how do we build additional skill sets as technology and the environment evolves? Because we're always going to have to acquire new skill sets, and it's not always going back and getting another degree. It's finding a way to say, I've acquired this skill set, I possess this skill set, and I am now qualified and capable, a little bit talking what Katie was talking about. I'm now capable of doing this job because I've acquired these skill sets along my career.
Oh, Phil, I mean, that is just fantastic. You touched on things that are so important. I'm just going to replay what I heard because such an important problem that cuts across over here, which is, how do you recognize prior skills and competencies? How do you translate them? And how do you give credits for prior skills? That's also a domain that you have to think about. And so which almost begs to having a language that is not necessarily embedded in the domain of the practice, because just like we talk about, enduring competencies or human skills, how do you find a language for describing competencies that is not so intimately tied to domain that you don't see its relevance elsewhere, which I think is a phenomenal, wicked challenge. The example that sometimes we talk about, we have one of our members who does a lot of work with AI and skills, and how you might look at resumes or LinkedIn profiles and try to parse the competencies that the person has. And the typical example we'll hear, if somebody has been waiting tables, let's say in a restaurant, when she or he is looking for another job, they go to the food industry or the hospitality industry, and they might have a whole bunch of competencies, relationship management, service management, which might be useful in IT help desk, say, and that connection is never made because your understanding of competencies is so intimately tied to a particular domain. That is wonderful, folks. This has been, I'm looking to see, this is such a rich set of perspectives. I'm watching out for questions over here in the chat. Some things that I have picked up is on this whole person development, and I'm reminded John Seeley Brown is a big guru of mine. He's an AI guru, used to be the provost at University of Michigan, and used to be Boyle Newman. And in one of his big treatments on education, he would talk about learning about versus learning to be. And as I was listening to Charlie talking about apprenticeship, mentoring, and bringing the human dimension, what we really want to do is not just have people have the component skills, welding, fitting, etc., but to know a large part of apprenticeship is, what does it mean to be a fitter? What does it mean to be a welder? What does it mean to be an aircraft carrier builder? And it is surrounded by both competencies and other kinds of tendencies. The question for all of you is, how do you scale how do you scale those tendencies? How do you scale mentoring? How do you scale? And an embedded question that I'd like to pose to all of you is, what do you see as the role of technology, if any, for either advancing the solutions that you have thought about, or directly advancing the challenges that you have talked about? So why don't I stop there, look for your responses, and I'll come back to more questions. So we can take it any order, Katie.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that. We, as a technology startup, so we definitely have a very clear perspective on our slice of the problem and how technology can advance the solution, ideally. And I think it relates back to a lot of the previous comments that have been made by you, Vijay, and by the group. So, you know, after spending a lot of time in government and nonprofit, doing research, trying to help companies build these competency taxonomies, trying to demonstrate business value of using competencies internally. You know, when you start a company, you have that moment, right, where you decide, what am I going to do that's going to actually be able to change behavior at companies, right? And there are a lot of questions in the chat and in the Q&A about this as well. So our perspective at Claira is, we've been talking about skills and credentials for 30 years, right? And there's no doubt that the labor market is headed that direction, toward smaller, transferable skills. You know, we're going to have to head that way in order to keep pace with technological transformation. So the trend is already happening, right? The market is headed that way. The challenge is, it has to be really easy for employers to adopt. Employers are the ones who say to the labor market, this is how we value people. This is how we recruit, create teams, promote people. So they are the ones that consume talent. So technology, we are SaaS, software as a service, powered by machine learning. That allows us to create something that's really easy for employers to just pick up and use. They don't have to create the system themselves. They don't have to put in any more work than just telling us what type of data they have. In 7 days, they've got a competency library that we keep up to date for them. And that's not only as smart as that one company, but it's as smart as every user of our software. So we think that technology's role is to take what they're trying to do and make it incredibly easy to implement it and see value.
Very good. Thank you. That's very helpful. Any other thoughts? Phil, Mariana, Charlie?
I can speak from the standpoint of actually training institutions that are preparing women for, or women and men for the workforce. I think that a key to scale, and I think this will only grow over the next coming years, aside technology, of course, is peer-to-peer learning. Because until, you know, the classical model of teacher or professor who knows it all to student, it has its good things, but it also has its limitations. And one significant limitation is scale in making things affordable. And when you actually realize that with the right type of structure, the right type of guidance, and the right type of technology to match students that better complement each other, there's actually huge potential for scale, with students supporting students, learning from each other as they advance on their own learning journey, learning from students that are ahead of time, are in that learning journey, mentoring students that are behind them. So I think that's going to be a really exciting trend moving forward.
Very good. Very good.
Vijay, if I can just add into that as well, I think you know, Mariana spoke about it there, that this idea of not only micro credentials but bite-sized learning is, I think, the term that we're now using. You know, these short bits of learning, but doing it on a peer-to-peer basis. There's a fantastic story at the minute, if anybody's following it. Ewan Blair, who is the son of the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, has created a worldwide community called Multiverse, and here is where you can sign on to be an apprentice anywhere in the world, and they go through a recruitment process, matching you with a workplace. But a lot of the learning is done in a community way, so that sort of peer-to-peer learning, the encouragement of others online. But again, just looking at the model, it goes back to that it's not all about technology, that it's about getting helping the person, making a better person. And if we take the sporting analogy of the All Blacks, or I don't want to be controversial, maybe the New England Patriots, a lot of the time it's not about getting better footballers, it's about getting better players, better people, creating the human element of that. And if we look at, one of the boxes of the matrix that Katie and George and them created, think of this in the problems it would have solved in the last number of years: communication, collaboration, empathy, negotiation, relationship curation. This is not only about human skills, it's about humanity. It's a humanitarian approach. This goes much deeper than preparing somebody for the workplace. This is preparing somebody for society. And if we have a better society and we prepare people better for society, the workplace is the benefactor of it. I think we have to watch not to always think of education as preparing somebody for a job. What about if we think of education, training, learning, development of preparing somebody to live better? And what problems would have been solved in Europe had we been better at communication, collaboration, and empathy in the last 10 years?
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. I think that's a fitting final statement for this panel. And you actually, in some case, presented a very good aspiration for the Global Opportunities Initiative as being a platform for creating a better world and looking at the workplace as a microcosm of this better world. So, and I hope the peer-to-peer that we're talking about are both people and institutions, and that we can create that community which will advance thinking about careers as a pathway, as a vehicle, as a lens into raising the floor for the world. So thank you all for your very, very illustrious, rich comments. As you can see from the chat, there's a whole bunch of ideas that are floating in, and the intent, the word generative was used and accretive was used a lot in the prior panels. We want to be collecting these ideas. This place becomes a repository of your ideas as we continue with shaping and strengthening the initiative. So thank you all very much. And I hope it's been enjoyable all. And I'm going to now turn it over to my friend, colleague, George, to take it away and take it to our closing keynote of the day.